in these articles. And he's suggesting that Copeland was being managed possibly by a mole in the BNP who was working for probably MI5. That's what he suggests in these articles. So although they were being carried out by Copeland, he was being used as a tool because they wanted this bombing campaign in place for a political reason. And he suggests it's the 2000 Terrorism Act. They needed some terrorism in London in order to get that act passed. That's what he's suggesting. Okay, so this is a CCTV image of Copeland's first target. So it's taken from inside an Iceland food store, and he has the bomb on his back here, right? We have the white baseball cap again. He was also caught on camera on an external CCTV system. This is just before he plants the bomb. So he puts the bomb next to the wall in Brixton. He goes home, the bomb goes off, injures lots of people. So of course, the police then get all the CCTV and they start going through them with a fine-tooth comb. And in Larry O'Hara's article, he reveals that the police, it took them 2 days to get this image. They had it on the 19th of April. However, it wasn't released to the media until the 29th of April, right? And that is the time period when he planted his 2 subsequent bombs. So what is argued is, if that image was put in the media as soon as the police recovered it, like on the 20th of April, his 2 subsequent bombs would have been prevented and 3 people would not have died. All right? He also suggests that there's a reason why they've suppressed this CCTV image, because, as he suggests, MI5 are running his campaign and actually watching him. All right, so this is a CCTV still from Brick Lane, where he plants his second bomb. And with this one, Copeland leaves the bag on the street, and a guy thinks it's a bag of tools and steals it and actually puts it in his own car. And the bomb then goes off, right? At the trial, the judge referred to CCTV on Brick Lane, but didn't allow it to be shown to the jury. And O'Hara suggests the reason for that is that Copeland was being followed. He believes that special branch officers were following David Copeland and watching him plant that second bomb. This is an aerial view of where he put the third bomb. So he's put the bomb in the Admiral Duncan pub, and O'Hara explains in his article that special branch were following Copeland up to this point on Broadwick Street, but lost him. And they were possibly even filming him before he's planted that second bomb. So here are some extracts from Larry O'Hara's expose. He says, intermittently, stories have surfaced Copeland was under surveillance when planting the Soho bomb. 2 important pieces of new information flesh out this rumour. First is reported comments by Scotland Yard's Detective Chief Superintendent Bunn to a pre-trial briefing under the auspices of John Grieve to interested parties. According to someone present, Bunn said of Copeland in Soho, "We were tracking him. Unfortunately, he gave us the slip. That's what caused the bomb to go off." There is yet more which Forbes did not say in print here for the first time. In particular, at a pre-trial briefing in June 2000, Steve Greenwood, along with Jerry Gable, were shown by police extensive footage of Copeland being monitored in Soho. That's before he's planted the bomb. They're actually filming him. This is an email released from gay rights activist Peter Tatchell. He says, I was phoned a couple of days after the Soho bomb by an officer based at West End Central. He says he overheard other officers discussing a phone call they had received about half an hour before the bomb went off. The police call was from a special branch unit saying they had lost their suspect in or near Broadwick Street. They requested backup. Their description of the suspect fitted Copeland's appearance and the bag he was carrying. So this is an aerial view. So they followed him up this street and lost him and were possibly filming him before he plants his bomb. This is an article from The Guardian around that time which states, there have been several persistent rumours the police had Copeland under surveillance before the Soho blast and lost him. Scotland Yard last night dismissed this as absolutely untrue. Other speculation has suggested there was friction between MI5 and Scotland Yard and that the two clashed over risk assessment. This too has been strongly denied. So if this is true, what O'Hara suggests in his article is that MI5 are running an operation involving Copeland and they want him to let these bombs off. Scotland Yard have found out who the perpetrator is and they just want to arrest the guy because they know he's dangerous. So there's friction between the two. All right, so we presume then that it's MI5 that are stopping Scotland Yard from putting out that CCTV image as soon as they found it. I repeat that it took a staggering 12 days to get the CCTV image of him from the Brixton site and put it in a newspaper, during which time he detonated 2 further bombs, injuring dozens and killing 3. The 2 subsequent bombings could easily have been prevented if the police had done their job.
I was devastated because we'd released the images on the Thursday. We were actively following lots of information that had come through, and we'd not succeeded in arresting him before he committed his next offence.
All right, now I've just put this on a calendar so we can see what happened and when it happened. First bomb went off here. Now there was a telephone call made to the police claiming responsibility for the bomb, that it was Combat 18. Now Copeland, the group that he was in, National Socialist Movement, was connected to that group, or splintered group of that, right? So that phone call has never been played, right? So we don't really know who it was. Could have been Copeland. We've got CCTV from this bomb, which we know was available by the 19th. Now there's a Crime Watch programme which put out an appeal for witnesses for the Brixton bomb. They did not show the CCTV image of Copeland on the Crime Watch programme. I would argue they should have shown the CCTV image of Copeland, and I would also argue that the Crime Watch presenters may have seen the CCTV image of him. I've spoken to the director of Crime Watch, Peter Morpurgo, and he told me, because it's a live show, they spend the previous day rehearsing with police officers, right? So that CCTV footage might have been available to them while they're preparing this Crime Watch programme, but they chose not to air it. And also, Larry O'Hara's article states that Crime Watch were going to play that phone call from the alleged perpetrator, but didn't. And bear in mind that O'Hara is also suggesting that Copeland is being followed before he plants his second bomb. I'm going to show you a clip from the Crime Watch programme. This is towards the end of the show, and Jill is reading out telephone responses from witnesses.
Well, following up with what Nick said earlier about the Brixton calls, several calls on that, some very good ones. Some people were seen on a roof in Brixton on the day with binoculars, but obviously we don't know whether they were connected or not.
Everyone hear that? Some people were seen on a roof with binoculars. Now, the official story states that Copeland had no help. He was a loner, so it can't be anyone connected to him, right? If you look at Larry O'Hara's research, there's only one conclusion you can come to, and that was special branch officers on that roof, possibly working for MI5. The claim of people being on a rooftop was repeated in a BBC article dated the 21st of April. It states, one caller reported people equipped with binoculars on a rooftop. So I went to try and get on the roof. Note that the buildings in that area have not changed since the events, so it was fairly easy to identify where any operatives may have been situated. Okay, so I'm here in Brixton, and this is the spot of the first nail bomb allegedly planted by David Copeland. Now, as we saw in the Crime Watch UK programme, Jill Dando said that there were people on the roof with binoculars, presumably with oversight of the bomb site. Okay, now I've had a good look around the rooftops here, and really I can only identify one place where they may have been, and it's just over my shoulder here on this rooftop. Yep. So there's a ledge here. Right. Okay. Right, I'm going to put the camera down. So, I managed to get onto the roof of the shops of Electric Avenue. So here I am, I'm on the rooftop at Electric Avenue, and as you can see over my shoulder is Iceland. Perfect vantage point for whoever was involved to watch with binoculars the man in the white baseball cap. The white baseball cap strikes again, eh? Now, Copeland's father said that Copeland didn't have a white baseball cap, and it turns out he purchased it just before his bombing campaign. So was he told to buy a white baseball cap so that he could be identified in the crowd? I think that's likely. Would you like to know when Jill Dando was murdered? The 26th of April. And she was due to read the 6 o'clock news on the 27th of April, by the way. If she saw the CCTV of Copeland, which we know the police had, and we know the police were in the studio then, right, that means she was in possession of information which could not possibly be put out, because it would reveal that the state were involved in this, right? Also, if she heard the telephone call from the real perpetrator, right? This is all revealed in my film, Kill Jill, the Dando Assassination Explained, and as I said earlier, this is a lesson in how disinformation works as much as it is in exposing false flag terrorism. Alright, so let's look at the Copeland case with other past cases. So I've put 9/11 up on there, although it's not UK, it's significant, in the 2005 London bombings, and compare them with the more recent terrorism. Now, these three attacks, I can tell you in quite a lot of detail what happened and who was responsible, etc., right? With the more recent cases, I can't. I don't know what happened at Woolwich. I don't know what happened with Joe Cox. I don't know. And London Bridge, Manchester Arena. Now, let's just consider what steps we need to go through in an investigation to find out what happened. We must address the questions in this order. What happened? How did it happen? Who was responsible? And why did they do it? It's a bit like a game of rounders, right? We've all played rounders, or have played rounders. You go to base 1. You can't go straight to base 2. You've got to go to base 1 first. You can't go to base 3 until you've been to base 1. All right? So the questions must be asked in this order. Now, as I said, with recent cases, we're stuck here at base 1. We don't know what happened, right? With older cases, it seems we can get much further around this rounders course. With Copeland, we know what happened. We know he built the bombs. We know how he built them and where he put them. Who, it gets a little bit more difficult to fathom, but I suspect it was the state, and it was done to facilitate the 2000 Terrorism Act. We can do the same with the London bombings, right? But with the more recent terrorism, what we are shown by the media cannot demonstrate what actually happened. With Copeland, what they showed us, it was easy to demonstrate what actually happened. The more recent cases, I think they're being much more careful by not revealing their modus operandi. And when this happens too quickly, which always the mainstream media do, it means the narrative is bogus. So we've all been there. You wake up in the morning, you switch the TV or the radio on, and mainstream media are telling you straight away what happened, how it happened, who was responsible, and why did they do it. So mainstream media on day 1 get round this rounders course. And when that happens, you know the narrative is bogus. It has to be. Because even if the perpetrators rang up and said, we did it and why we did it, you don't know that's true. You don't know they're telling the truth until you've compared it with the evidence and done a full investigation and found out what happened. This takes time. So they can't possibly do this. But the reason why they do this is to shut down any inquiry or any investigation. They need to get around this course on day one because they don't want people sniffing around trying to find out what really did happen, which is what we need to do. As independent researchers, investigators, we need to be comfortable sat here until we find out what happened. And I would promote an independent bureau of investigation which will go to cases like Grenfell and all of the false flag terror that we see in our streets, send investigators there completely disconnected from the police. The Citizens Bureau of Investigation, that's what's needed. Because we can't trust the police, we can't trust the government, we can't trust the intelligence agencies. It needs to be something which is done by the people who need to send investigators. And their remit is just to find out what's happened. Because once you find out what's happened, that's enough to expose these cases. That's all. You don't need to find out motives, really. You just need to find out what happened. And then you can expose the case. Publish a report, put it on the internet, etc. That's what's needed. I don't know. It would probably be quite difficult to do that, but I would certainly support something like that. I think that's what's needed. Okay, so let's just consider the whole concept of creating a patsy. We're going to blame someone for a murder that they didn't do. In the past, they've been fooled. So the London bombings was a good example of this. The 4 alleged London bombers thought they were taking part in Peter Power's terror drill. They were fooled, right? And if you fool your patsy, you must make sure that you kill them, right? You can use mind control. So with the Kennedy assassinations and the John Lennon assassination, I believe mind control was used. It's not always essential to kill your patsy if you've mind controlled them, but they often do end up dead. It seems we've got a new one. Just impersonate them. Is this what's happened in the Joe Cox case? I suspect it is. And I can just jump to the Woolwich incident, the drummer Lee Rigby case. If you recall, at that trial, when they showed the alleged perpetrator being interviewed at the police station, in the court, they showed this video and he has this blue blanket over his head. Why would you want to do that? Is that because he is impersonating the patsy and doesn't look exactly like him, perhaps? I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud with this. Okay, and as I've mentioned, a lot of the information war is carried out on the internet. But let's go back in time and just consider when it all started, really. If we go back 300 years and just consider, you know, what was it that first started programming people's minds with propaganda? We can say newspapers. 300 years ago, newspapers were invented. The problem with newspapers is that the information only goes in one direction. So whoever is publishing the newspaper, whoever has enough money or power to create it, has got huge control over people's minds. 80 years ago, there was a new technology came along, radio. But the problem with that was it did exactly the same. It sent information in one direction and one direction only. Then 50 years ago, the biggest propaganda tool ever invented came along. But again, information went in one direction. So it was just another propaganda exercise. 25 years ago, something different came along, which threatened the existing system, and that was the internet. And what the internet promised was to allow any individual to communicate with the entire world just by setting up a website. So it promised truly democratic sharing of information. And since it's happened, really, it's become a war. It's become a war between democratic sharing of information against pushing it back to what it was, which was an autocratic system. And over the last 25 years, we've seen some very powerful entities develop, and nearly all internet traffic now is administered or is handled via these entities. And I don't think it's healthy. What I think is healthy is people setting up their own websites and communicating with many, many websites and getting information independently, rather than using corporate websites. Because I think the net effect of these corporate websites is to just push the system back to an autocratic system where the influence goes in one direction. And we've got some rather sinister entities behind some of the more cuddly entities on the internet. So we know that intelligence agencies, we know GCHQ run vast number of projects online, private companies. Neil Sanders was talking about Cambridge Analytica months before it was revealed in mainstream media. If you're rich enough, you can also manipulate the internet. And also Visible Government now. Visible Government now are threatening to bring in laws to control the internet, and they're using the excuse of social media to do it. So time's up for immoral web giants. So they want to bring in laws against democratic use of the internet. Now, you might say, well, no, the information does flow in two directions. It's not one directional. Well, it's the influence that I think is in one direction, not the information. You submit information to Facebook and to Google when you do searches, but that information is then used in a subversive way. Let me just illustrate this with regards to Google, how Google actually works. This comes from a viewer. I work with the eBay search engine, but I was formally trained and expected to be working with the Google search engine. I was trained to be a judge for Google UK results, but they gave me the eBay job instead, though I passed the Google training. The company I have a contract with is Appin Butler Hill. A group of judges from specific regions have access to a portal. We are given real user search queries. The Google engine will provide a random return result. The portal will give us random results of the competing search engines. It is then our job to ascertain if the returned result was relevant or not to the query. There are pages and pages of guidelines that must be adhered to when making a judgment. If there are, say, 20 judges in the UK doing this, and the query is for Madeleine McCann, if the random returned result was your website or video, we would be encouraged to mark the result as not relevant. So that's page one of Google, right? What gets on page one of Google is just being decided by a bunch of people. It's not done automatically by some algorithm. Right, and they've got guidelines which say they must favour mainstream sources. This is due to the strict guidelines stating that sources like the BBC or Daily Mail are more trustworthy sources of information. What they would term as fringe or conspiracy sources, we are told to flag or mark as not relevant. So there's no actual test. There's no one trying to find out what the truthful sources are. They're just assuming that mainstream must be more truthful. This judgment and the relevant recorded data is from many people. If 90% of judgments mark BBC as most relevant, and I mark your site as highly relevant, I would receive bad feedback and risk my job if I continued to go against the mass judgments. So you can argue that the system, by doing that, is pushing it more back to an autocratic system, because all Google are doing is sending people to corporate websites, and we're back to the system of newspapers that we were at. Now, the other thing that's happening is, I think that the internet is being attacked and being, someone's dropping big dirty turds into the internet when it's been used in a democratic way. So some of that might be termed fake news, but it's more, it goes wider than just fake news. If you just look at YouTube videos now, there's so many YouTube videos which to me seem deliberately misleading, but it seems orchestrated to me. It's not just someone making a genuine mistake over factual information. There seems to be a plot behind it, I would suggest. You could argue that the social media sites themselves are just big turds popping up on the internet. So watch out for those turds when you're surfing the internet. It really is becoming difficult now. But the purveyors of fake news are the mainstream sites. This is still up on the BBC website from 13th of September. A totally fake story. The most important story this century, right? And the BBC have written an entirely fake article about it, and it's still there. And they point their fingers at fake news on the internet. Right, I'm going to show you a clip of Yuri Bezmenov, and he's talking about subversion, right, in general. But I'm going to apply what he's saying to what's going on the internet and what the internet is now being used for.
You see, the tactic of subversion about which I'm talking is similar to the martial art, the Japanese martial art. If some of you are familiar with that tactic, probably you will remember that if an enemy is bigger and heavier than yourself, it would be very painful to resist his direct strike. if a heavier person wants to strike me in the face, it would be very naive and counterproductive to stop his blow. The Chinese and Japanese judo art tells us what to do. First, to avoid the strike, then to grab the fist and continue his movement in the direction where it was before, right? Until the enemy crashes in the wall. The moment all these movements will be directed in one direction, right? This is the time to catch that movement and to continue it until the movement forces the whole society into collapse, into crisis, right? So that's exactly the martial art tactic. We don't stop an enemy. We let him go. We help him to go in the direction we want them to go.
So what I'm saying is somebody is using the internet for the kind of thing that Yuri Bezmenov is talking about there. And to illustrate the point, I've drawn this truthometer. Right now, we know that mainstream media will regularly push false narratives, right? Mainstream push a false narrative. The Skripal case is an example. There are hundreds of others. So that means that, by definition, the truth would be defined as a conspiracy. But you will always find on the internet now what I've termed wild conspiracies, conspiracies for which there's no real evidence, right? And what Yuri Bezmenov is saying is, look, these guys are a threat because they're finding out the truth and they're exposing us, right? So don't oppose them and bring them back to mainstream. You never do that. What he's saying is, just push them a little bit towards a more wild conspiracy. That's how we're going to deal with these bastards who are finding the truth. We're going to push them towards a less credible conspiracy position, right? And this is what the flat earth videos are, folks. I'm sorry if you believe the earth is flat, right? But that's what's going on here. What that's doing, it's discrediting some very good, powerful research about Apollo missions, right? That people like Andrew Johnson, who's here tonight, David Percy, Jarrah White, Bart Zabrell, many others, who their evidence is solid and it's cast massive doubt over the Apollo missions. And I'm going to talk about that in part 2. So watch out for those turds on the internet. I think obviously the honeymoon period was over a long time ago with regards to the internet, but I would just encourage to abort using any of these sites, which are, they're handlers really, they're handling you. Just, I would recommend use independent websites to get your information. So that's it for part 1. I'm going to talk about space exploration in part 2. So we'll reconvene at about 6:30. Do you, sort of 6:30? I don't know where I was. Yeah, at 9:30. 9:30. My watch is upside down.